Hello, 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 and a very time zone appropriate greeting to you based on whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to What the Trans!
What the Trans!
Yes, What the Trans, a bi-weekly podcast by and for the trans community. How the devil are you, Michelle?
I'm in pain.
Good.
I joined a leisure centre, and they do yoga, and it's the worst thing I've ever done. They say it's bending. They say it's like spiritual bending, which sounds great. You know, I'm a fan of Avatar: The Last Airbender, so I'm just like, oh, okay, I kind of know what I'm getting into. No, it's just loads of pretty people. Just lots of pretty people bending amazingly, and then there's me. Just this blob, just all gender dysphoric and slightly wet, and it's just the worst thing I've ever done. So, listeners, don't do yoga. How are you, Ash?
I'm fine. Yes, I was absolutely not expecting that reaction to yoga. I think that's not the reaction that you're supposed to have. People say, "Oh, it really calms you down." Anyway, yes, I'm fine. I didn't do any yoga this week, so I'm on a fairly even keel. But this week is a special week, isn't it? In the studios with us, we have a special guest. She is the presenter and writer of a podcast called One from the Vaults, which is a documentary format with excellent music. It's monthly, and basically you should all totally listen to it. And welcome to What the Trans, Morgan Page. Hello.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Pleasure, thank you. Very excited to have you with us. How are you?
I'm good. I got lost in South London on my way here, but eventually I was found. So it's a real 3-act story. Everyone loves a narrative.
Yes, absolutely. And it's nice that you could, in fact, have a narrative over something as simple as a journey to have something recorded. Although, having said that, South London is very confusing, honestly. I do find the whole place a bit, crazy, and I'm just going to stay here in the north where I understand things a little better.
But it's totally worth it, because just up the road, I swear to God, there's a 24-hour place that sells baths and toilets. It's actually 24 hours and sells baths and toilets. I can't go back to living in a town where I can't buy a bath at any time of day and night. I can't do that. I'm a city girl now. I'm stuck here. I can't go back. Don't make me go back.
I frequently find myself needing to buy a bathtub at 4 a.m, and I think, where could I go? But now I know. I know there is a 24-hour toilet and bath place right here in South London.
But of course, you're not originally from South London, are you, Morgan?
What gave me away?
I think it was your hair, actually. It's not something I've seen most people. I don't know. Yeah.
So I'm from Canada. Most people think I'm from America, but I am in fact from Canada. And I recently moved to the UK very dramatically on New Year's Eve. I packed up my whole life, got on a plane late on New Year's Eve, and then arrived here in London to, start my life over, I guess you could say, or to move on to the next sort of chapter of it. And now I live in North London, I guess you could say, like northeast-ish, somewhere. I live somewhere.
Like, we should be enemies, because I'm very much south of the river and have been for 10 years. Like, if I can't get this, I don't eat meat, but if I don't have the option to buy, fried chicken within, 5 minutes from my house, I don't feel like I can relax.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that's something that's missing from most places in North London.
I mean, as fascinating as I'm finding this discussion, I think it's possibly best if we move it on to, the actual podcast. So let's get on with our first segment, which is, of course, by tradition and law and custom and all of the other stuff, we call it Terrible News.
Oh, wait, is that... Oh, right. That's usually when I come in and shout something stupid. I'm sorry, I'm not on the ball. My whole podcasting, shtick has been altered because now there's somebody else in the room. And that's kind of... Morgan, you're welcome, of course, but I have a system. I have a way of being. And it's very, very odd to have somebody else in in the studio, as Ashley calls it.
Yeah.
It's not a studio, Ashley. It's a bedroom. I had to basically put half the shit in my room on top of my bed to fit Morgan in here. Anyway, sorry. We got to do some terrible fucking news. Ashley, what's going on?
Well, of course, the TERFs just won't shut up, will they? So this bi-week in TERF-based twattery, a bunch of them over in the US have founded the Pussy Church of Modern Witchcraft, which is, in their words, to serve women and girls who were born women and girls. This new religion has already been granted religious tax exemption in the US by the Internal Revenue Service and has made it quite clear that membership is only available to women and girls born women and girls. The church also rejects the concept of gender identity, transgenderism, and gender as being meaningful to defining what a woman or a girl is. So, is this the birth of a specific new hate group, or is this the Westboro Baptist Church of Turfdom?
I mean, I identify as, like, a straight woman, so, I mean, I've known lesbians, I've known many lesbians over my life, and I don't think I've met any of the subsect that describe themselves as Wiccan, so this is completely out of my realm of understanding, really.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't that new. Like, in the 1970s and 80s, there was this woman, Z Budapest, who was a Wiccan, who founded a sort of tradition of modern witchcraft called Dianic Wicca that was very specifically for TERFs. It didn't include any trans women. And so this has actually been going on for like 30 or 40 years. It's really nothing new. What's new is that, so the previous people who were doing it, the sort of Z Budapest people, were doing it because they genuinely were witches and like that was their whole thing. Whereas the people who are doing this Pussy Church of Modern Witchcraft are clearly just trying to use like religious tax exempt status to be able to have women's spaces that they can reject trans women from, which just seems like a lot of work to go through, honestly. Like, yeah. I'm not pounding on the door to get in any room that contains the people who would have made such a place as this.
Yeah, I've been in rooms with many trans women, and not one of them has said, you know what we need? Witch covens. Like, it's usually healthcare, it's usually, you know...
I mean, I think we need witch covens as well, but...
I mean, I was going to say, Michelle, I just don't think you're hanging out with the right trans people there, because, like, I can think of a good few that I would sort of hang out and spend my time with who would do exactly that, and indeed that I know. So it is, as you say, Morgan, it's exactly that they are specifically trying to have these religious exemptions and use it as a way to bash and exclude the trans community. You know, to what extent trans people would be interested in actually hanging out with this lot is, as we say, kind of is a bit of an open question. But it's interesting to find out that it's not new as well, although, yes, fine, there's ostensibly a difference in that there's this, you know, Dianic tradition of paganism, but it's, you know, I think I find myself looking at that quite cynically as well and saying, well, surely they were just doing the same thing. Okay, fine, so that it's justified by a belief system, but, you know, if it's quite after the fact, you can impose any belief system on it you want. It's like, well, that's that justification and what they've got, you know, and this lot just haven't put that together yet, but I'm sure they'll issue their pamphlets about the sacredness of women born women, spelt with a Y, because...
Just trying to think back to any of my experiences with witchcraft. I mean, technically, I represented the wind at a pagan wedding once.
Nice.
That's something I've done. I mean, that didn't particularly strike me as particularly anti-trans, and I'm still friends with, like, the married couple since I transitioned, and they seem pretty fine with it. So I'm guessing that, like, I would like to hear something from the Wiccan community about this. Like, I mean, do they have, like, a Twitter? Is there someone we can get in contact with? I don't know anything about this stuff apart from my one day in a Wiccan wedding is my only experience.
I know, it's kind of like, leave a message in a stone circle and they will contact you by Raven or something. I'm not sure. It's like, you know, or
in a circle of like a fairy ring of mushrooms.
Yeah. Well, this is just, as you say, it's just a really cynical ploy, and it's sort of kind of the usual suspects behind this, people who've been behind this kind of, I guess, stunt before. But if they're going to these lengths, it's like, you're obsessed. You're so obsessed with this. Why does this matter so much to you that you're just going to create a whole new space and ostensibly a whole new religion just to just so they could exclude people from it.
I don't know, maybe being a TERF is just amazing. Maybe being a TERF is just the most amazing, incredible thing that you could be, because that would explain it.
I mean, it seems like it must come with a real high, you know? Like, ooh, yeah, I'm really gonna get off on making people feel horrible for no reason.
Well, that works for Trump.
It's true. I mean, hate is a powerful drug.
It is, unfortunately, and it's everybody's just wasting their time. But so let's move on to other people who are continuing to waste ours and everybody's time. And back over to the UK and the story of a Labour councillor in Cambridge who actually recently quit her job in a huff. In a protest against a policy allowing trans people to access council-owned women's facilities. So she's specifically talking about trans women. So former Cambridge City Councillor Anne Sinnott accused the council of being in dereliction of the law because it stood by a policy that states transgender people will not be excluded from gender-appropriate sex/single-sex segregated facilities. So just going to point this one out for you, Anne. No, it isn't in dereliction of the law. It's quite specifically in the Equality Act. You should just read it. But as a nice little cherry on top of this particular cake, she could well be replaced in the role by trans rights campaigner Sarah Brown, who has previously been on Cambridge City Council from 2010 to 2014, and so she is now one of the candidates for the by-election that's been triggered on September the 13th. So that would be interesting. Well, I'm going to quit because trans people shouldn't be allowed to use the toilet. Well, that's nice. We disagree with you, and we're also going to elect a trans woman to literally sit in your old chair. So,
and not only that, like a trans woman who can read words, which is good for a councillor, I think. I think maybe Cambridge has dodged the bullet because I was about Anne Sinnott can't read.
Yeah, apparently she can't read the Equality Act, that's for sure.
Yeah, like Sarah Brown, I know for a fact can read. Like I've talked to her many times. And I can confirm she can read words. So that puts her like immediately 10 points above Anne Sinnott.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. And it's so strange that I have to say it's very forward thinking and commendable of the council to put somebody who, is unable to read any of the legislation in such a role. I mean, well done them in terms of access and so on. But actually, I don't think that's what's going on here at all. It's like, is this your hill to die on? Really? That's what you're going to choose?
I would like to warn people not to get their hopes too high, because Anne Sinnott is basically a Labour councillor in Cambridge, which is incredibly Labour, and Sarah Brown is basically running for the Liberal Democrats, which these days is pretty poisonous. Like when Sarah Brown was a councillor back in 2010, Lib Dems weren't quite as toxic as they are now.
That's true.
I would very much like to see Sarah Brown win the seat, but, it's all going to be a bit up in the air.
That's very true. But still, just the possibility that it exists.
I would love it if it happened. It would just be like a complete punch to the face. I mean, the headlines write themselves right there.
Yeah, pretty much. It's like, how are the mighty fallen? Wahaha.
All right, moving on to medicine and how it's great.
Well,
The BM...
Is it?
I mean, medicine as a concept is quite cool.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But, it's more the people that peddle it, I think, are kind of the issue. But yeah, let's get into that. The BMJ, the British Medical...
Journal.
Yeah.
Journal, I think. Yeah.
Sorry, I am sober, I promise.
Well, in fairness, I looked this up earlier on, and I was quite confused by it, because it does stand for, or used to stand for, British Medical Journal, but it has since 2004, I think it's officially just been referred to on everything as the BMJ, to the extent that the non-acronym form of it has fallen completely out of use. So I was having the devil of a time trying to find out if that was actually what it was earlier on. But anyway, yes, BMJ, British Medical Journal. Right. Please continue.
I'll try if I can read. I mean, I ran Anne Sinnott through the coals for not being able to read, and here I am screwing it up. Right. Yeah. Moving on, the BMJ, the British Medical Journal, or the BMJ, adds itself to the list of medical journals calling for better treatment of trans patients in all areas of care, specifically saying that this is not a funding issue, and instead describing it as a workforce problem. There are simply not enough staff in specialised clinics, and general practitioners feel ill-equipped to deal with questions about gender, according to an article on the BMJ's website. I mean, that's not coming as any surprise to trans people anyway, right?
No.
Okay, well, I think that's enough said, really, isn't it?
No, it's certainly not surprising, is it? But it's nice that these organisations are actually noticing. It's like, oh gosh, these people haven't just been being crazy for so many years. It's actually that they are right. Gosh, good lord, who knew? Oh well, silly us.
I think it's important to say that what the BMJ says doesn't always translate into a policy for the NHS.
No, of course. These are
as much as we would like it to be, because the BMJ sounds all official, but at the end of the day, it is a journal.
Yeah.
And the NHS England can basically just be like, no. But in other news,
well, relatedly, I suppose. Yeah.
In related news, and as a neat example of the lacking healthcare that they're talking about, the NHS could be taken to court and subject to legal action for denying trans patients equal access to fertility treatments, such as egg or gamete storage.
Yes.
Which I was never offered that. I mean,
neither was I.
I never really wanted to use, my creative whatevers to make a child anyway, but I was just like, that's odd. What if I wanted the option? I don't have the money to go to someone private, like a fridge somewhere or freezer. I don't know how it works. I know there's a freezer involved.
Is there? So I know what it's like over here, which is you do kind of have to pursue it. And I did ask about it sort of idly. It had been mentioned to me on the way down or something. Because I too had never really thought, oh yes, what I really want is to spread my genetic material. I'm not sure that was the main goal of my life, but so I know what it's like over here, and even just the briefest bits of research when I was trying to look into this and sort of phoning around was like, well, it's a tremendously long waiting list to even get the appointment to go in there and sit and put something in storage, and I couldn't start taking the estrogen, the HRT, until I had done that, apparently, according to some of the advice. So I thought, well, I'm not waiting. I'm not interested in doing that. It's fine. So there we go. Sort of job done. But it's, as you say, it was not offered in any, appreciable way. It's like if we spoke about it, it's like, oh, well, no, you have to sort that out sort of independently. And that's not been particularly good. Although I've got to ask, Morgan, what's the healthcare situation like for this, particular issue in Canada?
Well, in Canada, trans healthcare in general is light years ahead of how it is here. So mostly it's on an informed consent model. So you walk into a doctor, you're like, hey, I'm trans. They're like, okay, here are the risks of hormones. And you're like, great, I still want to take them. And then they just give you the hormones. You don't have to wait a year or 2 years or whatever for a group of doctors and psychiatrists to determine if you're trans enough to take them. You just take them. But
why did you leave?
It is a long, long story.
Fair enough.
But in terms of fertility storage, that is all private in Canada, so it's much the same as it is here. But one thing I will say is that there is this misconception going around that the minute you go on hormones, your sperm or eggs are done and you'll never have fertility again, blah, blah, blah. That's completely not true and is based on zero science. There are literally no studies that say that, because there's only, I think, one, maybe 2 studies on the long-term effects of hormone treatment, and there are no studies on the long-term fertility effects of hormone treatment. What I know from the work that I've done in Canada is that I've seen many, many, many people, many of my friends have cycled off of hormones for 6 months to a year and then being able to use their sperm or eggs again. This became so popular in Toronto that at the LGBT center that I worked for there, we even ran a course for trans fathers to be, for trans men who wanted to bear their own children. Some of them after being on hormones for 10 or more years. Basically, as long as you still have the organs, you can potentially use them. Now, that's not to say that in every circumstance that's going to be possible. And it's not to say that it's going to be easy. A lot of the people that I know who've done it have cycled off hormones, and it's taken 6 months to a year, sometimes longer, for their, sperm count to come up or for their eggs to start kind of flowing again. But there's no scientific evidence to say that you are definitely having irreparable loss of fertility. That is just simply not true.
Oh, it's a Jeff Goldblum thing. Life finds a way.
Exactly. So, this whole idea that it's the end, and especially TERFs love to push this because they're like, oh, all the kids going on hormones, they're taking away their fertility. And it's like, first of all, I don't want to be fertile. Second of all, that's not true. That's not based on anything. That is an assumption that some doctors are making that is not based on any peer-reviewed medical studies, to my knowledge. So that's my little piece on that one.
Excellent. I mean, in fairness, even if I'd sort of known that at the time, because I have read things subsequent to this where I thought, oh, okay, so maybe I could do the thing. But I'm genuinely not interested in doing that. I don't want to do that, essentially. So, I have my path is different.
Yeah, I'm the same.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm adopting. That's my future. That's something
Yeah.
But then, the option should be there, right? There are trans people out there who want to mother and father their children.
For sure.
It's astounding to me that, it was astounding to me at the time when it wasn't given as an option, and it's astounding to me now that I'm just incredibly surprised that there's a legal challenge there, and really happy about that. I think someone's going to do a test case at some point, and that's going to really fuck shit up, as the kids say.
Yes, that's definitely the legal parlance as well. Let's carry on, I think. So in other news, which is also not surprising to us particularly, a new report by Stonewall into domestic violence shelters' policy on trans women has emphatically shown that the vast majority of services are already trans-inclusive and that Gender Recognition Act reforms would have next to no impact on the services. The report, entitled Supporting Trans Women in Domestic and Sexual Violence Services, which you can go and read on the Stonewall website, reached this conclusion after talking to representatives from 15 different domestic and sexual violence services across the UK.
They do know how to name their studies, don't they?
Yes, they certainly do. I mean, it's nice and, it's unambiguous, isn't it? It tells you exactly what's in there, and I'm just having that reading problem. It's clearly infectious from that Labour councillor and being unable to get the words out properly. But the report did state that the domestic and sexual violence services in England and Wales have been supporting trans women in their single-sex, women-only services for some time already. Participants always take a personalised, client-centred approach to supporting trans women, as they do for all survivors. And many participants told Stonewall, that the reform of the Gender Recognition Act wouldn't have any relevance to how they deliver the services. While respondents were aware that there was a view that gender recognition reform could allow violent men to pose as women to access their services, which was just bollocks. But one participant expressed a concern about this. There was otherwise a completely clear consensus that services' thorough risk assessment procedures would safeguard against this. So there we go. Again, it's something that we have known for quite some time, that is drummed up into a big issue by the TERFs once again, saying that, trans-identified males in women's shelters will be dangerous and a threat. And it's like, no, trans women need to access these things. So, and again, it's kind of annoying that this is necessary, but this is unequivocal, isn't it?
Yeah, and I like that this is basically coming from the horse's mouth that certain groups would love to talk about, not just the TERFs, but also certain journalists and newspapers and sort of anyone who works with The Spectator, who is now, my least favourite news outlet ever, and I hope one day it just dies. But anyway, they always bang on about this as if they're coming to the defence of these services, when these services, by the sounds of it, are just well, no, we're fine.
No. You guys need to shut up, all right? Because we're just getting on with it over here. So
as news weeks go, that's actually quite a quiet one for us, isn't it? I thought that they were, and not all that terrible. There was the usual turf-based twattery with the witches, but apart from that, it seems to be pretty okay.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah. Well, there's been some sort of positives, but it's not going to be terrible news every week,
I've got some gender pop culture disorder to go through.
Nice. Well, fire away, Michelle.
It's kind of nice. There's not really that much going on in this either. Pose is finished, so, you're not going to get me gushing about how awesome Pose is anymore. But there is a new award-winning Belgian trans movie incoming before the end of the year that you all should know about right now, and I will help you with that right now. The film is called Girl, and it tells the story of a ballet student named Lara as she tries to become a professional ballerina. Critics have been raving about this film since its premiere at the Cannes Film Festival back in May. I think it was May. Probably May. It was one of the M months. Fuck it. Anyway. And it has been picked up by Netflix and will be out before the end of the year. But the downside is that Lara is being played by a 15-year-old cisgender actor called Victor.
Okay, I mean, in fairness, I have always quite liked the name Victor. But it's again that problem, isn't it, of a cis person in a trans role, but then with the person being so young? I mean, I'm not sure how I feel about it.
I mean, I still think it's a bad idea. I'm solidly against cisgender actors playing trans roles, particularly as so many trans actors are not up for cisgender roles. I think maybe it would be a very different world if trans actors could regularly play cis roles without problems with that, but clearly we're not in that world yet, so I probably won't be watching this film, even though I am very obsessed with ballet, ever since I watched Black Swan, which I saw as an aspirational film, because I'm a triple Capricorn and very intense, so I was like, it has a happy ending, yay!
It does? We did not watch the same film. I mean, the film has been made now, which is the thing. There's not a lot that we can do about it, but I think we can, as Morgan says, vote with our purses and wallets, you know? We can, I don't think I'm going to go see this, even though I do love pretentious foreign film. I love them.
Oh, yes.
And, you know, this director is pretty exciting. He's Lucas Don. It's his first feature film after a bunch of shorts that I had a quick watch on YouTube. They were very interesting. And by the sounds of it, Victor Polster, the actor, is being acclaimed by everyone. But then they are being acclaimed by cis people who probably have no idea what they're talking about when it comes and what the kind of damage this kind of thing can do. So, I mean, I'm very annoyed because ethically I cannot see this film, even though I desperately want to. If you see what I mean.
I mean, you can still watch it.
Yeah,
there's no ethics under capitalism, but
that's true.
No, I
yes, comrade.
I refuse to pay money for Dallas Buyers Club. I still saw it, so maybe I can refuse to pay money for this, but then still.
I mean, it's going to be on Netflix, so if you already have Netflix,
oh god, yeah, you're right.
You're already paying for it.
I'm already complicit. I did this.
Yes, well, as we said, welcome to capitalism, sweetie. Carry on.
But yeah, there is some good news, though, that basically sort of is the exact opposite of this. Trans people and allies from dozens of companies in Hollywood have come together to release an open letter to the industry asking for better recognition for trans people. The letter also points Hollywood towards a new guidebook created by GLAAD and 50/50 by 2020, a company, organization that's trying to get better representation in the Senate and all sorts of American institutions, which contains information on how to find trans people for trans roles, where to find projects created by trans people, and tips on how to be more inclusive. The letter was published in Variety over the last week, and signatories include Sony Pictures, Working Title, and the excellent Ryan Murphy Productions who make Pose, which, of course they would sign. Of course they would fucking sign. But hopefully, this and the recent nonsense over ScarJo almost stealing a trans guy's role will continue turning the tide for trans representation in Hollywood and, you know, stop things like this Victor dude getting the role.
I know, and it's, I was going to say, it's a difficult one, but it totally isn't. It's fairly unambiguous. And I'm really glad that this, this open letter does sound like big news. Because I heard rumblings of this earlier on this week when, looking for what we're going to talk about on the podcast, of course. So it's nice that, it's great actually that there is this movement sort of pushing towards change for better representation. And I think that's obviously something that's not just the trans community that has to go out and do that, unfortunately. But I'm very glad that that's what's happening. And I really can't wait to see some of the stuff that actually comes of this. Trans people telling their own stories. And actually maybe I get to see that at the cinema a little more often, rather than, as you say, there's lots of foreign films and indie films with, gay and trans characters in them. And, let's have something with a bit wider reach.
I mean, over the last year, there was that, teen rom-com, about, I think it was something about Charlie, I think was it what it was called. That came out only this year. I would love to see a proper Hollywood trans romantic comedy. I mean, we kind of had that with Boy Meets Girl a few years ago. But, yeah, I mean, at the time, I saw it and was like, it's one of us on the screen! And then I watched it a couple of months ago, just like, oh no, this has not aged well.
It's just a bad movie.
Yeah.
That's the problem. The actress, she was so good, but like the whole movie surrounding her was garbage. On the plus side, there is, so you know Trace Lysette, the trans actress who was in Transparent, and she also had a little brief guest moment on Pose.
Oh, yeah.
She is in a new film coming out soon called Colors of Ava, I think it's called. And I believe she's in the starring role, so that's very exciting. And also, as I'm sure you may have both heard, the CW show Supergirl has hired the first trans superhero to be played by a very young, or at least very young compared to me. Not that I'm a day over 18.
I'm just going to kill you for bringing this up, because I was basically spent too long ranting about how awesome
it wasn't too long.
Is the door open now for me to, fangirl everywhere?
Well, you might as well both just go for it. I'll get myself a cup of tea or something.
Squee! Okay, I'm done. That was all I needed to do. But yeah, that's going to be fucking great, right? I really hope they do the thing they did with Harley Quinn and, make her, get her own comic line and stuff. I want that to happen, and I think DC would be missing a huge opportunity if they don't do that.
Well, they have, so I don't know if you know who Gail Simone is. She's like a comics writer.
She wrote on DC. Batwoman, yeah?
Yeah, not Batwoman. She's done Batgirl. She's done Wonder Woman. She's done a million different things. And anyway, she has been really instrumental in introducing a lot of trans characters into the DC comics universe, which is really exciting.
She was the one who introduced, I can't remember her name now.
Batgirl's trans roommate. Yeah. She created that character and introduced her. So, there's actually some really good representation happening in comics right now, which is really nice. And hopefully, as the cinema continues to be dominated by comic-based films, we'll start to see those characters bleeding in. And maybe someday we'll even be so lucky as to have a trans superhero movie. Although there is one from Thailand from many years ago called Madam X. And it's a little wacky. It's like a Thai trans Sailor Moon sex worker-ish. Or maybe I'm remembering that wrong, but anyway, it's a little wacky. But
you can't see this, guys, but my eyes are popping out of my head. I have to see this movie.
Yeah.
I think it's called Madam X. I'm not entirely sure. I'll look it up and let you know. But yes, there is a trans superhero movie that exists in the world.
Right, you've got to give me the name and maybe a link to it, because I'm going to review the shit out of that before the next on the next episode. Right, that's a promise right here. I'm going to go and do my journalisting and bring you all of the news from Miss X,
Madam X.
Madam
I
X.
think.
Oh my god, that sounds amazing.
Excellent.
In similar Hollywood-related news, it's also worth noting that Variety magazine, which is the go-to magazine for Hollywood, just did a round table of trans actors for the first time. So it had Laverne Cox, Trace Lysette, as Chaz Bono, Brian Michael, who was on Queen Sugar, and Alexandra Billings, the amazing Alexandra Billings.
Yeah,
and
I saw that. I was going to watch that, but then
it's an hour long, so it is a bit much. But
that was
it's
an
excellent conversation.
I was too busy in bed, just moaning to myself about all the yoga I inflicted on myself to watch it. I should have watched it then.
All right, so I think that's enough of that. So let's bounce along to our next segment, which is, of course, the hot take. And this week, since we have Morgan M. Page joining us, what we're going to be doing is talking to her. So, again, thanks very much for joining us, Morgan. So let's talk about your podcast, shall we? So it's called One from the Vaults. Give us a quick rundown. Tell us about it.
So One from the Vaults is the one and only trans history podcast, and it brings you all of the dirt, gossip, and glamour from trans history. I write, record, and produce it myself, and I've been doing it for about 2.5 years now. It's fairly popular. It has, from time to time, been in the top 10 history podcasts on on iTunes, which is very exciting. But basically,
That's pretty cool.
each week I take the story of one trans person from the past 150 years or so of trans history, and I tell their story with kind of a focus on the juicier details. So I like to know, like, what drugs are they taking? Who are they having sex with? What was the drama? Like, what was going on in their lives?
That's the important stuff.
Right. Because so often I think we get reduced to sort of just lists of dates and places. And it's like, well, actually, people led really interesting and sometimes very bizarre lives. And that's very entertaining to hear about. And I think when you entertain people, you have a better shot of them actually wanting to hear about history. So,
Yes.
yeah, that's what I do. I run this trans history podcast, and it's great.
Yeah, one thing you missed, do you mind me talking about?
Go for it.
The one thing you missed, we just took a break, listener. I don't want to destroy the magic, but whilst we were taking a break, me and Morgan were talking a podcast business, and I was just like, oh, we've got quite a few now. We've got like maybe 120, 150 listeners, and Morgan was like, yeah, I've got significantly more. Like, I was trying to just boast and just be really impressive, and Morgan was just like, yeah, no, I've got more.
I mean, I don't have that many, but I've got like between 3,000 to 4,000 people who listen every month, which is like kind of a medium-sized podcast. And yeah, I love my listeners. Thank you, listeners.
So what made you decide to focus on that for your podcast?
Well, there's the official story and the unofficial story. The official story.
Well, which one?
Well,
which one are you happy to share?
I'll give you both. The official story is that I used to run trans youth groups in Canada, and I noticed that the trans kids that I worked with had no idea that trans people had even existed before them, or like only the vaguest of ideas. They really didn't know that there were any trans people like before the year 2000, basically. And as a result, they felt very sort of adrift in the world, because I think when you don't see yourself represented in culture, it's very hard to imagine a future for yourself. And so I started, as a result, telling people these stories that I knew from trans history, just because I've been around since forever. I mean, as I said before, I don't look a day over 18, but I'm actually a little older than that. And so I started telling these stories and noticing what a transformative effect it had on young trans people and even older trans people. And so that's basically why I started the podcast, as a way of getting those stories out there and, you know, sort of also making it so that I could have more interesting conversations in trans community, because I know all of this weird stuff that I'd love to talk about, but I have no one to talk to about it. So I wanted there to be more people who would at least have some understanding. But the unofficial story is that I actually started the what made me do the podcast was that it was part of a complex revenge plot against an ex-boyfriend who done me wrong. And I
Nice.
am just slightly a monster. So I was like, I'm going to make something that I know is going to be instantly very popular and will be all over his social media feed and really annoy him. And instead of doing something mean or destructive like bad people would do, I did something very constructive and like good for people in general, but would also ensure that he would feel very, very guilty without my having to in any way interact with him. And mission accomplished, let me tell you.
Ingenious.
That was many years and many loves ago,
Excellent.
so it's no longer a factor. But yeah, that's how the podcast got started. 2 versions of events.
That's a hell of a story.
It's a tale of 2 stories, no doubt.
I've been listening to your podcast all week, various episodes and stuff, and what I found the most fascinating part was that there are some people in history of trans people where you're just like, we don't know for sure if they're trans. Like, there's certain things that signal it, like with Ray Bourbon, the female impersonator, who, like, she claimed that she went to Mexico to have sex reassignment surgery. She lived in role for a bit and then didn't and then did. It's all a bit up in the air about who she really was. And for people who haven't listened to the episode, basically Ray Bourbon was like a female impersonator who gained notoriety in the 30s and 40s as a performer.
Yeah.
But also lived a very, very crazy life on top of that.
Right.
Like, how do you decide that a person, like, what kind of things are you looking for when you're looking at a subject to determine if they are trans or not?
Well, I think this is a really big question when you're looking at LGBT history in general. There's always that question among historians of like, would this person have identified that way? And like, those identity categories didn't exist back then, blah, blah, blah. Which is true, but I would also counter with the fact that heterosexuality didn't exist until the end of the 19th century when it was coined. There was no straightness before the end of the 19th century, right? In much the same way that like trans didn't exist then or gay didn't exist then because those words weren't used. However, we can look at people's behavior, right? And so we can see, for example, when I'm looking for trans history stories, I'm looking at people who lived cross-gender lives. And usually I'm especially looking at if they persisted in doing so. So like some people, for example, in the Civil War, there were sort of war lovers or whatever who were young women whose men had gone away to war, and the women got up in male drag and like enlisted as soldiers so they could find their boyfriends basically. And after the war, they would like go back to living as women. So I wouldn't necessarily think that that was a trans person, although there were some trans people who did persist in living a cross-gender life. I look more for people who showed some evidence, whether through their speech or their actions, that it was about more, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Ray Bourbon is an interesting example because she was a drag performer in the 40s and 50s and even into the 60s who was really, 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 really funny, like an early stand-up comic, essentially. And it is very hard to say if anything she ever said about her life was true, because she was a huge liar. Like, she took on the name Bourbon to link herself to, like, the royal Bourbon family, and, like, clearly had no relation. And then after Christine Jorgensen, who's often said to be like the first American trans woman, though that's not really true. But after Christine Jorgensen had her surgery in 1952, Ray Bourbon released an album of trans-related comedy music in which there was a song called Let Me Tell You About My Operation, in which she claims to have gone to Mexico to have surgery. And what's interesting is that it could be said that she claimed that so that she could get a laugh, or she claimed it so that she would stop being arrested for female impersonation, or cross-dressing, which she frequently was arrested for. But then also, she actually claimed in her medical files to have had some kind of operation, but then later in her life started claiming that it was cancer related. And my guess, I mean, I didn't examine the body, but my guess is that she probably had an orchiectomy in Mexico, and perhaps that was cancer related because she was getting a bit older at that time, but maybe it was gender related, and we'll probably never find out. But what we do know is that she ended up maybe paying two people to murder a couple of people, which was because they, like, killed her pet dogs. So semi-justified, but, like, probably still a bad idea. So she's quite a character. Yeah, but it's hard to say. Was she trans? Was she just a female impersonator? Like, where is that line?
Well,
so, yeah.
If you see, like, in like in certain drag culture and stuff, a lot of trans women find themselves being drawn to that because something's askew in Gender Town, and then they come out later. Like, it's so, like, I can imagine that there's so many, like, trans women over time have been hiding in various versions of that. Like, wasn't there a scene in 1930s Germany which is basically very similar to sort of like the ballroom scene as depicted in Pose and stuff like that?
Yeah, well, actually, in Germany in the 1930s, they had what we know as trans people, right? Like all throughout the 20th century, really. But in terms of the female impersonation world, the drag world, like, there are lots of trans women who are involved in it. There have always been trans women who've been involved in it. In fact, in the 1950s and 60s, after Christine Jorgensen popularized the idea that there was a surgery available that you could have, a lot of drag clubs, up until like the end of the 60s, had policies that you could only work there until you had your surgery. And it was so common that if you look at any trans women from that period, almost all of them worked in those clubs, like Finocchio's in San Francisco, or the 82 Club in New York City, and would like continue working until they had saved up the money to go to, whether it was Guadalajara or mostly it was Casablanca with Dr. Georges Beru. And so, yeah, like if you look at, for example, in Paris, there was a club called Le Carousel, which was like the number one female impersonation club in Europe. It was so huge. In the 1960s, almost every single person who worked there had surgery and started living as a woman while they were working there. And that's people like Amanda Lear, and April Ashley, who some of your British listeners may know.
I got to meet her once.
Oh, really? Oh my God.
There is a picture of me out there somewhere with me, Rebecca Root from Boy Meets Girl,
right, and
April Ashley. And if anybody out there's listening and has that picture, send it to me. I don't know. It's somewhere on Facebook, but I wasn't tagged in it. So I don't know for sure. But anyway, sorry, continue.
Yeah, but like sort of all those people, Cosinelle, there was just like this whole generation of women who ran that club all at the same time and then all transitioned within a couple years of each other. And yeah, so that's really interesting. I think it gets a little more complicated when you leave the 20th century because, like the ways people identified changed because before sort of the 1920s and 30s, there were basically no surgeries for trans people. And before the 1930s, there was no hormones at all. Like hormones didn't exist. They weren't synthesized until, I believe, 1937. So before that, it gets a little complicated, but there are cases where it's really clear what's going on. Like in one of my episodes called The Female Husband, I cover someone from the 17 somethings who, was named Charles Hamilton, and he was a quack doctor. So like there were two types of medicine in England at that time. There was medicine, which could only be done by men. And then there was quack doctory, which could, in theory, only be done by men. But this trans guy basically started living as a man, trained to become a quack doctor because he couldn't get into real medical school, and then was traveling the south of England, basically selling snake oil to people while marrying all these women, these like straight women. And he had a strap-on made of wood and rubber. And like, he didn't tell these women that he was trans either. Like, he went to some lengths to hide the fact that he was trans. And so like, that's a person who was alive like 300 years ago, who it's very obvious was trans. And like, he was eventually caught and, publicly whipped for it on multiple occasions, but he persisted in identifying as a man. You know, like every time he got caught and put into jail, he even told them that he would never wear women's clothing. And so like, obviously that's a trans person, right? But unfortunately, there's, in the 1970s and 80s, there's kind of a strand of historians who were just starting to examine gay and lesbian and, bi and trans history, which was then known as gay and lesbian history or gay liberation history. And, a lot of these people got sort of swept up into the categories of gay man or lesbian when really they aren't necessarily, identifying that way, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, so that's the kind of stuff that I look for when I'm trying to figure out, like, is this a trans person? And sometimes it's a both and situation, right? Like, someone might be kind of in between.
But yeah, or someone who's kind of been, there's evidence and statements and whatever, suggesting that someone's been quite deliberately ambiguous. Is that something that comes up? Something that we might consider these days to be, oh, well, that sounds somewhat like a non-binary person. Have you come across anything of that nature?
Absolutely. So, like, for example, in the late 60s and early 70s, Andy Warhol, the famous artist, loved to surround himself with trans people, and 3 in particular were became quite famous as a result. One of whom was the trans woman Candy Darling, who's very iconic, very beautiful. She died very sadly because of cancer. And then Holly Woodlawn, who was a Latina trans woman who just passed away recently, who you can see on a couple episodes of Transparent if you watch that. She's a wonderful actress. But the third person was a playwright and actor named Jackie Curtis, who lived sometimes as a woman, sometimes as a man, experimented with hormones, but never stayed on them for a particularly long period of time. And there's a great quote by Jackie Curtis, which I can't remember the specifics of, but she basically said, like, I'm not a man, I'm not a woman, I'm not trans, I'm not gay, I'm just Jackie. And I think that is, like, very much the essence of what we would now term non-binary identity, or like a historical figure that we could look to and be like, this person is definitely non-binary, like really lived their life in a non-binary way, like in a very sort of gender fluid situation. And yeah, was just a spectacular human being. So that's a good one. But even further back, you can find people who didn't sit comfortably in the categories of man or woman. And yeah, like this history is just out there and people aren't, aware of it. And so they feel like, or the news will portray us as this new phenomenon that's like scourge of the earth or whatever. When really we've been here. We've always been here. We've been here since the dawn of time. There's no recorded human society that did not have some kind of person living a cross-gender life. Like, that just doesn't exist,
Yeah, when I was just looking, like, when I was first coming out, I couldn't find any of the stuff. The closest I got was, like, what are the names? Like, Fanny and... You probably know these people.
I think I just saw a book about them in the...
Like, high society cross-dressers and stuff who
yeah.
kept getting arrested in the 1800s before... They assumed that they were banging, essentially, that these two, in quote-unquote, guys were banging each other because they wore dresses.
Yeah.
Where they were just like, no, we just like going out and looking great.
Right. They were parodied on Little Britain, I think.
That's where those people come from?
Yeah, that's supposed to be a parody of them, which is, very
fuck
offensive.
Little Britain. Fuck. I don't think there's ever a trans woman that hasn't had something from that shitty show shot out of them at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interestingly, to bring it to the UK a little, there's, so for example, when you look at LGBT history here in the UK, one of the big things people talk about is the Molly houses from, I believe the 18th century. And, the Molly houses are really interesting because according to at least what we hear from the court records, not only was sort of gay sex happening in these places, these sort of like brothels that existed, like Mother Clapp's Molly House. They were sort of brothel, taverny type places, and there was gay sex that would happen there openly. But not only was that happening, there was also a lot of people cross-dressing. And it's hard to say, like, did those people identify as trans? Quite a number of them were sex workers. So, we could look at it from a whole bunch of different perspectives, but that's another place that we can see that there's clearly something cross-gender going on, that probably at least some of the people who were doing it were trans. There's an amazing illustration from the tabloid media about Molly houses back then that has someone who's assigned male at birth, like, sort of half dressed up as a woman, and someone who's assigned female at birth, half dressed up as a man, and they're like clearly kind of having sex with each other, or like in the middle of a role play thing. And I'm like, oh, it's the original MTF for FTM couple. Like, this is my life, basically.
Yeah.
In an illustration from the 18th century. Can you imagine? Like, it's amazing.
I think it would do so many trans people good to see that kind of thing, or to see like evidence that it's not just a generational aberration, because that, like you said, that's a message that we get all the time. We get that, oh, this is a new thing coming up now. Now these people exist. We've got to deal with this new problem. And it's validating to hear that it's not new. That basically that I'm not fucking crazy.
Yeah, totally. And I think, well, let me just jump on that point real quick, is that I think often it's framed as a new thing. And then when people are willing to acknowledge that such a thing exists, they always point to other cultures. Like they, like Native American Two-Spirit people, or the Fa'afafine of the sort of Pacific Islands or whatever. Like they always point away. And one of the things I've done in my show is really specifically look at North American and European trans history, both because I don't want to speak for another culture, and I don't want to make those sort of mistakes, but also because I think it's really powerful for those of us who live in North America and Europe to know that our history has been here forever. We're not new to this culture. We have always been part of this culture. That's why there were laws against our existence for a long time. Like, you don't make a law if there isn't
unless
something...
it's already a problem.
Yeah, if there isn't a problem, you don't make a law. So, like, why would there be anti-cross-dressing laws if no one was cross-dressing? Like...
God, so it must have been a bad day when they actually made murder illegal. They were just like, oh, God.
Okay,
Jesus, this is dark. We got to make a law.
So, how many episodes of the podcast have there been?
We're in the 50s now, right?
No, we're not at 50. I think we're at 28, maybe. And then there's also like bonus mini episodes for my Patreon subscribers. So there's about 10 of those. So it's like really like 38 episodes. And I just did a very special episode for an art project in Brighton that only 25 people in Brighton will hear, that my friend Emma Franklin is doing. So yeah, like 30, 40 episodes I've done, really.
Cool. And so, final question on this. Do you have a particular favourite of all the people that you've managed to look at?
I mean, my absolute favorite episode is the Valentine's Day special, which is about two British trans people, actually, named Roberta Cowell and Michael Dillon. Okay, so I've heard of Roberta Cowell. Yeah. And so on some of the media projects that I've done previously, I went on and said, Roberta Cowell was awesome and you should look her up. Although, okay, so it would be more accurate to say she had an awesome life. Towards the end of that life, she was perhaps a bit less sympathetic to what was then termed gay liberation than one might hope, but nevertheless, she did have quite the time. So, yes, sorry, go on. Sorry to jump in there. Yeah, I mean, she was a character. But what I love about... So this story, basically, there was a trans man named Michael Dillon. In the 1930s, he became the very first trans person to use hormones. And he did it entirely on his own, and he actually made a record daily of the changes that the hormones did to him, which represents the very first trans medical research, which is fascinating. And then he ended up becoming the first trans person to have phalloplasty, and right after he had done that, he wrote this book, which is the first trans book by trans people called Self, A Study in Endocrinology, in which he pretended that he himself wasn't trans, and then he wrote this whole book about like trans people's special medical needs. But he didn't even have a word for us because he had never met another trans person, so he just called them those people. But anyway, that book's actually still available. But long story short, after he released that book, he got a letter from another trans person who was like, I'm trans like you are, but I'm going in the opposite direction. Can you help me? And he was like, yes, let's meet for lunch. He was like, yes, a woman, because he was really into women. He had never had sex before. And so he met this woman for lunch, or like this soon-to-be woman, I guess you could say, because she hadn't transitioned or anything. She was like trying to get the transition ball rolling. But anyway, he immediately fell in love with her. And she immediately saw a path to hormones. And so she sort of took advantage of his huge crush on her, or like literally led him on into thinking they were in a relationship. And as a result, she got on hormones, and then so no doctor could operate on a trans woman at that time in the 1940s because of something called mayhem law in the UK and in Canada and in the US, which prevented you from altering the organs, the healthy organs of a quote unquote man who could be enlisted into military service. It was like against the law. But if the organs were already fucked up, you could take them out. So, no doctor would operate on her until Michael Dillon gave her an orchiectomy himself on like a kitchen table, and then took her to a doctor to have a vaginoplasty. And he did that, and then he proposed to her, and she turned him down and was just basically like, fuck off, I got mine, I'm done. That was Roberta Cowell. And he was really heartbroken. So, Michael Dillon then became a ship's doctor in the Merchant Navy. And
Because that's what you do.
Right. I mean, it's the time period, right? And he becomes this ship's doctor, and then Roberta Cowell sold their story to the tabloids. And
Roberta.
When he arrived at the next port of call in America, I believe, there was a whole, like platform of journalists waiting to take his picture. And he wasn't out to anyone on the ship or anything. And then anyway, he ended up going to India and becoming one of the first Western monks, which is interesting, or like one of the first white people to become a monk in Buddhism. And then he died. And Roberta Cowell went on to become semi-notorious for being a trans woman race car driver in the 1950s. Yep. And there's like in the British Path Museum, there's video clips, which you can see on YouTube, of her driving her race car and apparently doing quite well at it. Anyway, she's a real character.
She certainly was.
Is what I'm saying.
And prior to all of this taking place, during the Second World War, she was a fighter pilot as well. So
yes. So when Channel 4 did a documentary on this story, they called it the Sex Change Spitfire Ace.
Yes.
Because she flew Spitfires.
How is there not a series of movies about these people?
Right?
I mean,
this is a trilogy, right? This is a full-blown trilogy.
This is absolutely can we crowdfund that? Because I want to play Roberta Cowell. Because can you imagine? Just, being that independent and, kind of a bitch, really, but
yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. So,
I'm thinking extended universe. I'm thinking we get like Harry Benjamin involved as a character. Like, we cover all of those people.
Oh my god. Well, call me when you want to write it.
Jolly well shall. Okay, awesome. Thank you for that, Morgan. But I think we need to start wrapping this up, don't we? But yes, so once again, the podcast, One from the Vault. How can people get to that?
They can find it on SoundCloud, iTunes, or anywhere else you find podcasts. Just search One from the Vaults. And you can also find me on Twitter at Morgan M. Page, or my podcast's Twitter at OFTB Podcast.
Cool.
Which you should all totally listen to, because it is endlessly fascinating and has particularly great music choices.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to be checking that out at work this week. So, but now let's rattle on through to the final couple of little bits of the show. And, of course, it's the Dickhead Dispatches.
Do they have to send dispatches? Can't they just go away?
Yeah, I know, right? But no, they can't, apparently. So this bi-week, we're just going to have to go with the dickheads who actually spent time and effort making little dick-shaped stickers with "women don't have penises" written on them and stuck them up around London, including on the offices of the LGBT charity Stonewall. Seriously, dickheads, just get a life. Find a hobby. You're obsessed. It's not healthy.
And they've ruined stickers.
Yeah, stickers are cool.
Stickers are a wonderful thing, and they've ruined them.
Indeed. But, so images of these stickers were, of course, shared on social media, and the aforementioned Sarah Brown, who is also a member of the Stonewall Trans Advisory Group, actually told Pink News these stickers are puerile and disgusting. There is a strong push to demonise trans women in the UK, and I really worry where it's going. She is absolutely not the only one, but this is so childish, isn't it?
It's really childish. God.
There's not really a lot to say about it, is there? It's just like, I know what's going to win the fight. Stickers.
Yeah.
It takes this very particular kind of idiot to come up with that kind of plan.
Dick stickers.
Dick
But
stickers.
specifically dick stickers, right? It's like dick stickers. It sounds like a private investigator, doesn't it? Hi, I'm dick stickers. No. But the thing is, like, that's the sort of shit that teenagers do on maths textbooks, right? Is putting little stickers and drawing little penises on them. It's like, what do you think this is going to achieve? Apart from make people think that you are the absolute obsessed, crazy dickheads that you are.
It's not exactly going to get to people who don't already agree with them.
No, it isn't. And, to the extent that you wonder why they're pushing like this, since every time they push, more people turn against them. And, that's good for us, but it's also like, ugh, why are you even bothering?
Well, I hope they don't get good at activism. I mean, that's the thing that's working, in our favour, is that they're just not very good at it. Like, every time they try something like this, it does just backfire.
Yeah, because people are just saying, this is nonsense. You're crazy. Shut up. Stop hijacking pride parades and put your sticker maker away.
Alright, that's enough about these people. Let's talk about icons. Let's talk about heroes.
Yes. Hell yes. Who's our hero?
Our hero, our icon of the bye-week is Kate fucking Bornstein. Legendary activist, writer, and hero of mine and everyone who has a brain. Basically, at the moment, she is starring in a Broadway play called Straight White Men, and during a recent performance, Kate got heckled by some bellend in the audience and loudly announced, "You are not welcome here!" whilst Kate was trying to deliver her opening line. But what makes Kate a fucking hero is her response, which she later posted on Facebook, saying, "She could not have been more wrong. The cast, crew, and company of Straight White Men have been warm, welcoming, and inclusive of me and the other trans actors in the show, Ty Defoe and T.L. Thompson. The production company, Second Stage Theatre, have only expressed delight in welcoming us aboard, and the staff of the Helen Hayes Theatre could not be more welcoming. We, all of us, give and receive nightly hugs. So I don't know who she thought she was talking about when she claimed that I'm not welcome. I was not shamed by her, I was puzzled. What could have caused this woman's outburst? I've been chewing that over, and the best I can come up with is that one of her children or grandchildren has gone through a gender transition that troubled her greatly, to the point that she just boiled over when I took to the stage. Look, Straight White Men is a great work of art, and great art does upset people. It happens all the time. Please know that I'm not upset or afraid. I'm more than ever proud to be a part of this show." And I wanted to point out that is a very Kate Bornstein response, because a lot of people would just be like, she's a dickhead. But Kate Bornstein is just like, yeah, I get it. You can't touch me.
My favorite part of that whole situation is that someone paid for Broadway tickets just to heckle Kate Bornstein. Like, you're wasting money just to be a dick.
And that's got to be so expensive.
That's got to be like $100 minimum ticket, and you're just gonna get escorted out. So, like, why would you waste the time and money, though?
Apparently, she managed to stay for the whole show,
Oh,
according to
really?
people on Twitter.
Did she heckle the whole time?
I'm not entirely sure. There was a thread going from Armie Hammer, Kate's co-star.
Mm-hmm.
People who don't know, Armie Hammer played the Winkelvi in Social Network and things like that.
Or was he the one who was in Call Me By Your Name?
I don't know. I've not seen it.
Maybe. I don't know.
He's
I could be making that up.
To be fair, his career hasn't been particularly too hot since Social Network. Like, he's been in a lot of clangers. But yeah, so basically Armie Hammer, tweeted out, to the woman in the audience who felt it was appropriate to yell, "You're not welcome here," at Kate Bornstein, our beloved friend, co-worker, and now family member, feel free never to come back. And during that thread, he's sort of talking with people, and one person said in the thread that these people were sat in front of me, they weren't removed, it was awful, but everyone around told them to shut up. And then Armie Hammer was like, "Do you know what the seat numbers were? Because I'll tell the theatre." And then they gave him the seat numbers, and I'm assuming Armie Hammer...
Maybe he's had them banned from the theatre, and that's great. Although, on the other hand, maybe they watched the play and they learned something, and maybe they won't be dicks again in the future. Who can say? I believe people can change.
Yeah, he definitely said that he's going to give it to the seat numbers to the appropriate people at the theatre, so these specific people won't be able to go back, but it's a bit weird that they weren't removed. But then, I don't know, you're in the middle of a thing, like, if you go in there and just pick these people up and try to get them out of the room, that might have disrupted the show more.
Unless you're Patti LuPone and someone's cell phone has gone off during your performance, Patti LuPone, Broadway icon, literally has shut down the whole show and waited for the person to either turn off their phone or leave. Which I think, as a person who grew up in the theater, who comes from, a theater family, I think is fully justified, honestly. Turn off your fucking phone if you're in the theater.
When I went to see Hamilton at the beginning of the year, someone's phone went off during, Quiet Uptown. And I was so angry. Don't fuck with Quiet Uptown, people. Don't fuck with that song. Hamilton's been through a lot.
I just don't understand why there are people who still have ringtones on their phone. Turn it to vibrate like a normal adult human being.
I don't even...
come on.
I don't even know what ringtone my phone's set to. It's never on. It's always just on, vibrate or silent. And it's coming from a similar place, kind of... Well, I'm not from a theatre family, but, I did spend my teenage years kicking around with a lot of lush lovies at Wigan Little Theatre, and that was pretty awesome. But people that were particularly disliked were those that would sort of have a mobile phone that would be allowed to ring, particularly if they were to then answer it and say, "Hello, sorry, yeah, I'm in a play." But then, that also extended to people that coughed loudly. So it was, there wasn't a great deal of sympathy going on there. And that, I am afraid, ladies, is the end of the show. Da, 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 da. So thank you very much to Morgan M. Page for joining us. Check her out on Twitter. Check out One from the Vault podcast. I'll be probably obsessively listening to that all week. Michelle, anything for you?
Thanks again, Morgan, for coming to my house.
Your studio.
My studio, yes. I may actually take a picture of my studio and put it on the Twitter later on, just so people can picture exactly how professional this setup is. But yes, thanks for listening to this episode of What the Trans. Follow us on Twitter at What the Trans. Go like us on Facebook. Do all the internet things. We are on the internet things. Go find us and do the things. And yes, we will see you in 2 weeks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.